All right, guys. First of all, I just want to say thank you. The feedback that I've gotten from most of you, you've probably read the ebook either through Amazon or through my Shopify store, or you've seen the YouTube videos, and the feedback's been really tremendous. I think probably it's what led me, more than anything else, led me to the conclusion that I need to kind of create a systematic approach for players who are learning the square-to-square swing, or they're trying to learn how to golf, and they maybe got some really good information from YouTube or ebooks, but they haven't quite learned how to take that information and incorporate it into a kind of a step-by-step systematic approach into actually building their golf swing. So most players, we've all been there. You get a great tip, or you have a lesson, and you have some really good results right off the bat, and you feel like, hey, I've hit it, this is going to be great. I'm just going to keep working on this, and I'm going to keep getting better and better. And time after time, it just gets worse over time. So we have this great result right off the bat, and we feel like we've really learned something, or we're going to make a lot of progress, and then we regress. We get worse, and we can't find back that magic that we had in the beginning. And that's just because we haven't really thought about or taken the time to consider what it takes to actually groove that new swing or that new move that we're trying to make. So I'm going to get into some drills when we get further on through this program, this little mini 3-part series. But for right now, I think most importantly, I just wanted to say that this is common. This is the normal progression of things. I've had lessons from, I don't know, maybe 30 coaches. I've spent thousands of dollars, as you probably have. I've read pretty much everything there is on the internet and in books. And as I said, I've taken so many lessons, and I've gotten these great results right off the bat, and then not been able to sustain them or get better through time. And so most recently, I started really studying the process of learning, or the way to ingrain a new skill. And so that's what the mastery course that I have offered is all about. And that's a little bit about what this 3-course, this little mini course is supposed to do. It's supposed to help you understand that not only do you have to understand what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish with the golf club, but you have to understand how to get that ingrained in your swing. And that's the big piece, the one piece that takes me the most time probably in any lesson. It's not explaining the what, it's not explaining the mechanics, it's explaining how to get from where you currently are to getting a grooved, consistent, solid contact using those new mechanics. So we're going to get into that, and I'm going to offer a couple drills that'll help you do that. Before we get into the actual drills and the actual grooving of the swing, we have to understand kind of why it's so difficult for us to learn a new skill or learn a new movement. I think so many of us, we want to get that instant result. We want to just figure out that one thing that's causing us all these problems. That's causing us to not get the ball flight that we want over and over and over again. And it's really interesting how the brain works. It's such a huge benefit for us to have these habits, and the golf swing is just, it's a skill which is very similar to a habit. It's fantastic that we have them, actually, because you learn to swim at a very young age, and you don't want to have to relearn to swim every time you get into the water. So that's kind of what our brain does. It takes a new skill and it learns it, and then what it does is it takes these little pieces of this new skill and it puts them into kind of a chunk. So you have this pattern, or this chunk, which is your swimming pattern. So you've learned it, and now you've saved it in your brain, and now you can recall that skill anytime you want to. And that's the exact same thing that happens when we learn the golf swing. So it's a good thing, because we don't want to have to relearn our movements every single time we go play golf, but it can be a bad thing because we are creatures of habit, and because if we're trying to learn a new movement, invariably our old swing mechanics are going to want to run every time we look at the golf ball. Our cue in the golf swing is the golf ball, or maybe it's the target, whatever it might be. It's this thing that keeps coming up over and over and over again. So while we're playing, we get out there on the course, and even though we might have a new swing movement in mind, or we have a new intention, we have kind of the same cue, which is the golf ball or our target. And so when we put that cue into our brain, the response is our old habit or our old routine. So if we're going to learn a new routine, we have to understand that the cue is probably not going to change. When we're playing golf, the target's always going to be there. The ball's always going to be there. but we can replace that old routine or that old habit with a new one. And in order to do that, we have to groove the new habit and really get it into one of those chunks of material that we can recall time and time again. So the best analogy I can think of for this, the one that I use constantly, is this thing that I call the lumberjack drill. And we're going to do that here for sure in this video series. Essentially, if you were a guy and I just said, hey, go out into the woods, find the biggest tree that you can find that's lying on the ground, and cut that thing in half. If I gave you the biggest saw I had, and I said, go out there and just cut that thing in half, you'd go out there, and if you started just wailing away with this huge saw just at some random spot on this tree as it's lying on the ground, what you'd find is that you'd make these really aggressive strokes, and you'd go back and forth, and you really wear yourself out. And at the same time, you'd find out that you're not actually hitting the same spot over and over and over again on that tree. You're kind of scarring the bark and creating this little channel, but it's kind of a wide, just kind of concave in the tree. You're not actually really cutting through this thing. So the proper way to do that, if you really wanted to make a difference, if you really wanted to cut through that thing the fastest, you'd get a smaller saw, something that you could control, something that you could make really finite and accurate cuts with. And you'd get out there and you'd pick a specific spot and you'd start very small, very accurately start cutting away at that one point until you created a little groove or a little notch in the wood. Then you could go up another saw, a little bit bigger saw with bigger teeth, and you could make a little bit bigger stroke, and you wouldn't have to worry that you were going to miss that spot because you'd already created that channel. So once you've gotten to that point where now you've got this bigger saw and you're creating even a deeper channel and a wider groove, now you can go and get a big saw and you can wail away at it and not have to worry about your saw coming out of that channel. So that's what we have to do with our golf swing. We have to get to a point where we've got a groove or we've got a notch. And we don't do that by making full swings. So many times a lesson occurs on the driving range and the player wants to get better with his driver. However, if he's making full swings with his driver, he's just going to be kind of running his old routine or running his old habit, and he's not going to be actually hitting that groove very often. So what we're going to do in the mini-series, and what I do with every player I have, whether it's a one-day session or a 3-day or a 5-day, we start really small and just first understand the mechanics, and then once we understand the mechanics, we start grooving that swing on a really small level. So that's what we're going to get into first in this first video. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's talk about what we have to do in our golf swing in order to get consistent ball flight, to get a shot that we know each time how far it's going to fly and what direction and what curve. So there are 3 things that tour players do better than everyone else when it comes to ball striking. They control the swing path, the club face relative to that path, and the low point of their swing. So if I had a draw player, for instance, and it's an interesting fact that PGA Tour has just about as many fade players as it has draw players as it has straight players. So about a third of the PGA Tour hits fades, about a third of the PGA Tour hits draws, and then about a third of the PGA Tour hits a relatively straight shot. But if I were a draw player on the PGA Tour, my swing path might be something like 3 or 4 or 5 degrees to the right of the target. My club face is consistently going to be just slightly less of that. And if you have the 4 Fundamentals of Ball Flight ebook, you understand why this is. But briefly, the face has to be somewhat less than the path in order to have the ball curve back. So if the path is 5 degrees to the right, the face would have to be about 3 degrees to the right so that we get some counterclockwise spin and have that ball curve back. So they control the path, they control the face, and the last thing that they do really well is they control the low point of their swing. So PGA Tour players very, very rarely hit one fat or thin. And that's because every single swing they make, their club is traveling downward on its way to impact. The only exception might be a driver. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every PGA Tour player is hitting up on their driver. It just means that some Tour players do hit up on their drivers. But with every other swing in the bag, they're going to have an angle of attack or a swing that's traveling slightly downward into impact, and their lowest point of their swing arc, the lowest point that the club ever reaches, will be on the target side of the ball consistently. So what we do in the square-to-square swing to set that up, and I'm sure you're familiar with this already, but to briefly go through it, we brace that right leg. Every single setup, every single swing, we brace the right leg. We put the foot in a position that kind of feels like a runner's block position that keeps us from shifting off the ball. And that just helps to ensure that our weight and our center of gravity stays kind of neutral or even gets forward, so that we can help to ensure a downward angle of attack and a forward low point. So that's number one. Number two, we set the handle forward. So we kind of place the handle in a position that feels like or kind of mimics what our impact is going to be like. And we see this time and time again from tour players. They don't arrive at the ball with a perpendicular shaft or a 90-degree to the ground shaft. They arrive at the ball with the handle forward. And so that again is because they're trying to strike the ball on the downswing or as the club is on its way downward into the ball to ensure for solid contact. So we brace that right leg and we set that handle forward to kind of predispose this downward angle of attack and this forward shaft lean and impact. The last thing that we want to do in setup is we want to make sure that we have a grip that's not too weak, a grip that's strong enough to maintain a square club face on our backswing. And the reason for this is the PGA Tour player consistently has his path, whether it's from out to in or in to out or straight, he consistently controls that path. But the biggest part of that is his club face is not very far off his club path. So if his path was 5 degrees to the right, his face is 3 degrees to the right, that's only 2 degrees. And the way he controls that is he doesn't have the club face rolling and flipping through impact and changing directions a lot through impact. He actually has the club face coming in, and it's relatively square to the arc at this point in the downswing. He's got the club face already looking down the path on which it's traveling. So that ensures that he doesn't have a lot of club face change through impact, and so that ensures that he can consistently deliver that face on a angle that's relatively close to his swing path. So when we're setting up, we want a grip that's strong enough to allow for a square face when we're making our backswing and a square face as we're coming through the impact zone. So those are our three things that we do in setup. We brace, we set, and we make sure that we've got a grip that allows for a square face. Now the first thing that we can do when we start to groove this swing, or as we're trying to build this notch and get really, really in a good place so that we can start making bigger and bigger swings, the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we can do all three of those things consistently well before we actually introduce a ball. So the very first drill, the very first thing that I do with every player, whether it's 1 day, 3 day, 5 day course, I always work to groove this first little swing. So it's brace, set, we've got the grip for a square club face, and then we're going to feel like the left shoulder just kind of tilts down and in, and that gets the club back, and then the left shoulder going up gets the club through. So we brace, set, tilt, tilt, or turn, turn. And what we're looking for there is we're looking for all of those alignments that we preset at address. We're looking to maintain those throughout this little grooved swing. So I've got the handle in a good position for impact already. I can just turn back and turn through, and I should get a forward low point every time. So when you're doing this drill, the biggest thing you're looking for, a square club face to path, a swing path that's slightly into out or close to square, and the final thing, or the second to last thing, is this forward divot that we're doing each time. And we can kind of check in our follow through. This final piece would be to check our follow through and make sure that we've maintained those alignments all the way through impact and beyond. So that's kind of the big first drill that you've got to do on your way to grooving this swing. And we're going to get into some more swings with the ball, and then we're going to hit some shots with our wedges and talk about how you can take these drills that you're working on to groove your swing and actually see a huge improvement in your wedge play.